Okay, thanks everybody in the audience for staying with us tonight to watch Try Harder. Jerry, would you like to introduce our guests tonight?
I definitely will. Hi there, everybody. I'm Jerry Redfern from the Society of Professional Journalists, Rio Grande chapter here in Albuquerque. Tonight, I'll be hosting a discussion with Debbie Lum, who's the producer and director of tonight's film. She has explored cultural stereotypes in My Tiger Mom and Seeking Asian Female. She made 2 short docs with Wang Wang about his films, Chan is Missing and Dim Sum, and co-produced and edited Kelly Loves Tony and edited To You, Sweetheart, Aloha, and the Emmy-winning AKA Don Bonus for POV. Lum wrote and directed the fictional films Chinese Beauty, A Great Deal, and One April Morning. And also we have Dr. Hansel Burley, the chair of the Educational Psychology and Leadership Department. Oh, sorry, I got to back up. I have that backwards. Dr. Hansel Burley, he's the dean of UNM's College of Education and Human Sciences, and he was the chair of the Educational Psychology and Leadership Department and professor of educational psychology in the College of Education at Texas Tech. He received his PhD in curriculum and instruction from Texas A&M University, and Dr. Burley, who prefers to be called Hansel, also serves on the board of directors of New Mexico PBS. So thanks to you both for showing up. And thank you, Debbie, in particular, too, for bringing us that film. That is just really something. I've watched it twice now. And I have to say, each time I'm kind of left thinking, is that the message? The thing that I come out of it with is the quote from one of the kids saying, what is it? I just think that I'm not good enough. We go into it thinking, this is going to be amazing. We're seeing these incredible students. They have these incredible stories. They're super hard driving, and they're driven by other people to do incredibly well. And it's like 90% of them come out of this process crushed. And I wonder if that is really what you thought was going to come out of the film when you went into it.
Yeah, I did want to know what it would be like to explore failure for a young adult on the cusp of adulthood, knowing that you read all the headlines about college admissions and you hear about the statistics and like they're going to confront rejection, right? But I didn't actually realize that would be so brutal, actually. I mean, as a parent, as an adult, I went through it a long time ago. I totally relate to Rachel's mom, who says rejection is a part of growing up. Right. But like to actually watch kids go through, 25 rejections is harder than what the headlines tell you. It is pretty, it's exactly what you said. The really surprising thing was that nobody came out of the process unscathed, even the ones who did really well.
So I guess, like you're saying, that's sort of the first step into adulthood, is not expecting to get something, hoping to get something, and maybe one kid out of all of them gets what they want, and the rest of you. I mean, it's not like they went to bad schools or anything like that. It's that they're all crushed. They didn't get into Stanford and Harvard.
Yeah, and of course, the kids are Alvin, one of our students, when he watched it. Now, as a college, he's actually graduated from college now. And he basically said, God, I wish I could give that high school kid a big hug and say, it's all going to be okay. Because it is going to, I mean, that's the thing, like these kids are going to do okay, as long as they can get through, I think, the mental health consequences, frankly, of what they're going through. I can see Hansel is nodding.
So yeah, Hansel, why don't you tell us what you see at UNM from this and what you've seen of students coming in at our school here in Albuquerque?
Well, absolutely. We tend to have a very different student in many ways. We're a very diverse campus. We are a Hispanic serving institution, a minority serving institution. That's also a research one. So we've got high activity around research. And so there's a lot of diversity in talent and where students are coming from. So what I've experienced, and I've been here for really only 2 years, or less than 2 years. There's a really very different student here. But I will say that the film definitely speaks to some of the core issues we face here in the United States. Really, issues around inequity is probably the huge issue of our times in lots of ways, and this extraordinarily narrow focus that we have on not only just, there's only one path. The path is college, and getting into the right college, and getting the right scores to get into the right college, or having the right profile, and to have so much of it depend upon some aspect of things you can't control, like your identity. I think the film really speaks to a great struggle that we have in our culture.
I'm thinking about that. There has been a lot of talk in the last several years that I don't recall from my own time in high school about the sort of mental stresses of going to high school and juggling, it seems, increasing personal loads, increasing stress and pressure to get into college. And then actually the other side of getting into college, which is paying for it, which is an interesting thing. I think that was only noted by one of the students who received an acceptance letter. And he said, I think that he got actually a 4-year scholarship to go to the school he went into, but the rest of them weren't really discussing that. And I was thinking, if you do get into Stanford, you don't get a scholarship, you run the risk of paying that off for the rest of your life. Was that something that they actually talked about? Is that something that factored into their decisions on schools, or is everybody just thinking we're going to the best school and we're going to pay for whatever comes up at the other end of it?
That was surprising that many of the students and parents in particular were prepared to make sacrifices in order to get their kid into, these upper echelon schools, quote unquote, and it was something that came up all the time. We feel, when you're applying to college, there's like 1,000 deadlines that these young kids have to hit, all like from, every single week there's something, and the financial aid one was a big deadline, and we filmed and we interviewed students around that too. There's only so much you can put into, a film.
Sure, of course.
But yeah, just to follow, like Rachel, the character in our film, who's biracial, her mom is African American. They were kind of joking around and scratching a lotto ticket, but they really were trying to figure out, because she didn't, she was just trying to figure out how they were going to make, but they were determined, regardless of what it would cost.
It's funny. You open with a scene of a teacher explaining humor and jokes, and that's actually kind of what that is, and the jokes based in pain, and it all comes back around. In a two-part question, I don't think it came up in either version of the film I saw, but what is the actual Asian student population of Lowell? I'm guessing it fluctuates a bit from year to year. And I know that there's been a change in admission recently. But at the time that you filmed, let's phrase it that way. At the time that you filmed, what was the Asian population of the school? And then there was a question from the audience, an audience member asking if Asian students know that they're less likely to be accepted at a place like Stanford if they're Asian American, and if they're from Lowell, why do they still apply at a school like that? So two-part question.
Very good questions. At the time we were filming, it was, over 55%, close to 60% Asian American Pacific Islander. However, if you include students who are biracial, and pretty much most of the students who are biracial at Lowell are, half Asian and half another ethnicity, then it's higher than that probably. Recently, there's been a major change in the admissions, and it's now at just about 51% Asian American. So it's still a majority Asian American high school, and it kind of it's definitely it's a definitely different, higher numbers of Asian Americans at Lowell High School than at other high schools in the school district. But by the same token, it's not the high schools with the most numbers of Asian American students in it. There are other high schools, public high schools, that have higher, only public. I mean, I'm not referring to private, because it's a reverse. There are more, there's more representation of African American students, and than higher numbers at private schools than in the public schools. At a school like Lowell, which is very low representation of African American students, but like the representation of Asian American students in private schools doesn't come anywhere near the public schools. So really what you see is that Asian American students are like the core, the base of San Francisco Public School District. They really are the core ethnicity that supports the public school. So it's a little bit different than a place like Stuyvesant in New York City, which is another Lowell-like high school. There's a whole bunch of them out there. They are all hitting the headlines right now. But but to answer the question, I think for many, many decades, Lowell High School has become a place where Asian American students kind of associated with like the Harvard of San Francisco. And in many cases, the families feel like it's better than Harvard, it's like, it's really this kind of like public institution where traditionally it was really a place that would allow you to go to a state school and just have a quality education and not have to pay for it, like at an Ivy League school or a fancy private school. And that has shifted in the last decade or so. But still, that's why many kids go there, because it's actually Lowell High School that they want to go to, and not so much, or it's actually Lowell High School that their parents want them to go to.
Oh, I see.
And then the college, what college you're going to get into, they find out once they get there, and then realize, oh, it's, this is actually harder than I thought it was going to be.
So actually, that part of that segues into something I think is a question for Hansel that just changed here in the state of New Mexico, where we made higher education actually open for all. I'm not sure exactly when the governor hopes to implement that, but that she, in the last legislative session, she set money aside to pay for higher education for anybody who wants to go to college in the state. And I'm wondering how that, Hansel, how do you think that sort of differentiation of representation is going to change the way that UNM looks and schools, higher schools in New Mexico look, and how they accept students, really?
Oh, in New Mexico, I think it does take, at least in the minds of students and those who are wanting to come to college, it takes money off the table. What it does for us, I think it increases our possibilities in the kind of diversity that we're going to see, and that's a good thing. But it also means that we have to be prepared as higher education institutions to meet a wider range of student needs, particularly developmental type of needs, where students may need increased support in basic skills, just writing compositions and maybe mathematics. Also, ultimately, I believe it is a good thing. However, we have to have the support mechanisms in place in order to help students as they move through our systems. A lot of students are coming from a variety of backgrounds, neighborhoods, a variety of schools. We've had 2 years of pandemic. There's been something like learning loss during that particular time. This is an unusual time. And this state is really unique in the nation in a lot of ways, in the way that we have a kind of a balance among very large groups. There's almost no majority group, right? It seems like. So there's a lot of work that we'll have to do, I believe, and to be ready to support students. And we are trying to put some things in place.
Also thinking about that and putting things in place for the students, there's also what comes before and in high schools. And New Mexico has the unenviable reputation of generally being among the lowest ranked public school systems in the United States. We graduate, I think, maybe 76% of students, and maybe 72% go on to college or some sort of further education after high school. So it's an interesting thing to see this story from Lowell and then try to overlay it on what we see going on in the state of New Mexico. And which is not to say that there aren't good students here, which is not to say there aren't good teachers here, which is not to say there aren't good schools here. But in a perennially impoverished state, how do you work that? How do you build that up? How do you create more Lowells in a place like New Mexico? How do you see that happening?
I would say is we can't think in a linear fashion, and that is I think that's been a problem in the past. We have to think much more systematically, and that we've got communities, we've got schools, we have universities, neighborhoods, filmmakers, industry. It's all a part of an ecosystem, and everybody needs to be a part of helping schools do a better job of developing students. We should have calendars and learning experiences for students all through the calendar of the year. And there should be players coming from not just universities, but businesses, fraternal societies. All of us have got to be a part of this ecosystem, I believe, in a state that we have. I would also argue, even though there are some good measures out there, I don't fully trust those ranking systems. I'm not saying that we should be blind to that. It's one piece of information, but we fully have to understand our own state. And a part of fully understanding is really coming to terms with the power of poverty. Years ago, decades ago, actually, a lot of my work used to be focused on college access and the factors related to college access. And one of the great lessons I learned is that poverty is huge, is powerful. It intersects a lot about who we are as a culture in the United States. It intersects with race and power and just other things that are going on in our society. So there are some really tough things that we certainly need to think about, need to talk about, but we need an ecosystem that's doing things, that's really providing students with wraparound learning experiences in many different ways.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it, and I think about that talking about the ideas of poverty and poverty dealing with education. There were characters in the film who were less economically endowed than others, but yes. I think on the whole we have to admit that San Francisco is a different character entirely from the state of New Mexico or from Albuquerque or.
Absolutely. There's some very interesting research that focuses on second generation immigrant students and some amazing success that they have had here in the United States. The research goes back about 30 decades or so, and I haven't kept up with it, but it's much more sophisticated now. But essentially, that second generation, as a rule, are honestly a group of strivers. They tend to do well, and it cuts across these identity groups we're looking at. So you can take a look at second generation immigrants from Southeast Asia, from Southern Asia, from the Caribbean, from West Africa. It's really quite interesting what occurs with that particular group. So there are other things too that we can take a look at. Yeah. To get some ideas about how students can be resilient to poverty.
So the obvious question, somebody from the audience brought up the obvious follow-up question, which is, do many low-income kids go to Lowell? And I guess the actual idea of that would be, is there a percentage of that are considered low income, since that's usually a government thing that's tracked? Do you know that, Debbie? Is that a thing that they've tracked and keep track of?
They do track that. They use the metric free and reduced
Yeah.
students that qualify for that at Lowell High School. It varies over the years. When we were there, it was 40+% of the
Oh, really?
population qualified for free and reduced lunch. I think it's a little bit lower now. And it's been higher than that. And I think historically, it has been that place for students, like I was saying earlier, who cannot afford a private education, but they want to get an excellent education. And so, like, if you look at the Asian immigrant community, which, of course, those second generation immigrants that have come like post 1965 in America are the result of immigration policies that favor more educated people. And because the others are not allowed in, there was legislation at the turn of the century that forbade the Chinese laborers and the Asian laborers from coming into this country. And so a lot of this is, institutional, like the poverty and education, that component is institutionalized. But I'm getting off point. The free and reduced, that sort of, I think there's a myth that Lowell High School is this kind of elite public school. And really what that ought to refer to is their academic, prowess, I think, or, the way that they do rank on test taking measures. But, for example, our California State Controller, Betty Yee, she's an alum of Lowell High School. She grew up in Chinatown. Her parents, I believe her parents worked in a factory. And, she was taking the bus 90 minutes to get to and from school, to go to Lowell High School. So, I mean, it has actually historically been that place where somebody without the means could get an education. And that has to do with, I think other high schools, San Francisco is not really a neighborhood school. It's like, it has the selective admissions process. And so it's sometimes there's like public high schools that do really well. And they're really a reflection, like you said, of the wealth of a suburb or a location. Whereas Lowell High School is really, we live in a very particular ecosystem in San Francisco where, 6-figure salaries can still be economically disadvantaged. And literally it's because the cost of living is just, insane here. It's really crazy. And yet we're in California where, it doesn't really rain. So yeah, we can play. But, but still, it is, there are lots of students like that I met. There was a girl actually who, one of the girls we filmed more than the 5 that we focused on. And one girl, in her senior year, we filmed her going down to take her citizenship test and become a US citizen. And, she was kind of like, I could never compete, I came here a few years ago and I don't even expect to apply to the so-called good schools. But, there's lots of stories like that at Lowell.
Well, first off, I was just in California and I'm now back in New Mexico. I have to say, you got way more rain than we got here, but it's super duper dry and we're on fire. But other than that, another question came in, which is that, I'm going to rephrase this question that came in. Does an elite school like Lowell, or what was an elite school like Lowell before they changed their admissions this past year, does that actually exacerbate sort of classist ideas? I'm thinking there was a book that came out recently, Caste, that was the name of the book, yes, which looks at sort of social differences among people beyond the large scale stereotypes that we have, and talking a bit more about sort of money and place and how power transfers down the line. And I'm wondering if then Lowell might be seen as a way that it creates these power structures or feeds into them, or does it actually, I mean, if you have more than 40% of the kids at the school on reduced cost lunches, maybe it actually breaks those barriers down a bit. Did you think about that? Did you have a feel for that when you were there, or how the kids themselves viewed that?
I think that I can share what other Lowell community members would say, which is that it breaks down those barriers. We're in this larger ecosystem where there are these sort of barriers to entry in the corridors of power, and I think it does actually give access to a lot of people who wouldn't normally have that access. Because actually, I mean, that's one of the things that you hear about the change in the admissions policy. Now there's even more of rumbling anyway, amongst families that, okay, we are definitely leaving San Francisco, because if you can't, I mean, you can barely afford it anyway. And then you're pinning your hopes on going to a high school like Lowell. But, now, so you kind of hear things like that. And I would say that, again, it's like I think one of the tricky things with education in America is it's so localized and regionalized, and everything is very specific. There's not really a one size fits all roadmap to how to solve the problem with education. And in San Francisco, it's very easy to misread the data, and it doesn't map out in a global way across the country in the same way, right? So like there's other high schools in San Francisco that are public schools that are selective, that have diverse, also have diversity issues, and no one is really examining those schools. I think what most people feel like is, it's not that there shouldn't be a Lowell, it's that all the high schools should be more like Lowell. There shouldn't just be only the one.
Sure.
But we do, we live by the same token, like these parents and most of the families that I meet are all dying to go to these very exclusive schools that really do, kind of propagate a caste system, an unspoken caste system in America,
Sort of riffing on that about how different Lowell is, and that we should be, reproducing more Lowells across the country rather than always trying to get into the one or two very good schools. A guy named Kevin wrote in, it's something not so much a question as a comment. And I think this ties into that. I think, including even briefly the story of the teacher who faced a potentially life-threatening situation and then received a life-saving curative transplant, adds a needed dimension. The students and parents were understandably totally focused on their lives and futures while the world outside keeps on turning, which is an interesting point. And another point that I thought, though, is that teacher was not somebody I fully recognized from my own time in school, which was, at theoretically the biggest high school in the biggest city in Montana, which is a totally different thing from, we won't say how many years ago. But it's a different high school, and it really did seem to have very different teachers. And I guess I was wondering a bit more about how teaching reflects on all of this as well. Was Lowell also a place where the best teachers end up going? Are they recruited to go to Lowell in that same sort of way? Or are these just the teachers whose numbers came up and they ended up going to Lowell?
I think what happens is Lowell, maybe, and in some ways that could be where the unfairness happens more so than in the students, is that the teachers would joke that Lowell High School was the place you go to retire. And so once your lottery comes up that you get into Lowell, you wouldn't ever want to quit that school, because they have this rare opportunity where they spend all their time teaching. The kids, they don't have to convince any kid to show up to class. Like they're all it's a very strange, it's imagine if you had this collegiate atmosphere, but they're young kids, so it has a different energy, but it's very much like, Shay said, the white kid in our film, he said that Lowell High School was a place where you could nerd out on physics and not get thrown up against a locker for it. And he really loved that about Lowell. And so I think the teacher, I had the same thing. I mean, I went to like a private high school and I never had a teacher like Mr. Shapiro. I felt like, my private teachers were dialing it in. But he really cares about his students. And in fact, all of those teachers, and I mean, we had a pretty, we went deep into one direction. But generally the teachers that I met they really cared about their students. I mean, there's a recent article in the New Yorker about Lowell High School, and you get that from one of the teachers there in that article, who's a math teacher. I saw that with theater teachers, English teachers. But you also heard from the gossip in the hallway that the teachers don't have to teach because the kids are so so motivated.
I'm sure that helps. That definitely was not the case at my high school, which wasn't a bad high school. It was thought to be pretty decent, but the teachers are definitely spending a lot of time getting kids to pay attention. I guess we now have to ask the third part of the triumvirate here. Hansel, what was your high school experience like? Did it bear any resemblance to what we saw here in the film, or was it?
Well,
you don't have to say when it happened. You don't have to say when it happened.
I definitely won't. I would take that. It was in Texas. I would say that. And to one of the points that Debbie made, place matters in a big way when it comes to education. When I went to high school and those disco days, whenever that was, football was everything. It was the entire culture of the school, right down to academics. I mean, there were times when on Fridays, because that was football day in the fall, there wasn't much learning going on. But one of the things that you did see at my school, I don't think so much that is reflected at Lowell, but you will see at a lot of high schools, is a kind of caste system. Right down to who gets which teacher, where's your classroom located, the rigor and the relevance of instruction that you're getting, all of that will be different depending upon whether or not you're in a college track or not. And you'll have these tracks. In fact, we call it tracking. As a matter of fact, you could take a look at college tracks. You could take a look at scores on the SAT. You could take a look at what that book talks about, the caste, and you can actually see parallels right across. And you could see that at my high school, and that was unfortunate. I happen to have parents who were educators, so we knew a bit about how to manipulate the system. But I have good friends to this day who were caught in the churn of that system and just couldn't get out of it. And what was defined for them in school became the beginning of definitions of their lives. And those students had to work, those former students, those friends of mine, and several have done well, but they had to work extremely hard in order to break those stereotypes, those low expectations of them.
Thinking about those are hard stories to think about, but I think that was very similar to my own high school as well, public high school. And that's kind of the way that it happened, in a slightly different way, in that those students who were shoved toward college and the like, I go back and look at my high school graduating class, and all the best students no longer live in Montana. They all went to other places with better, higher paying jobs. It's like this whole top level of the school left. And I know that happened for several years around that. That's probably a different discussion, and not here to talk about me. But I think, Hansel, your points also touch on actually another question that came from the audience. It's actually a more painful question, is that do Lowell students have a higher suicide rate than normal? I mean, considering the pressure, considering things we've hear in the great media out there, do they have higher mental health issues than normal?
Well, we were filming there before the pandemic. And, I know that from teachers anecdotally that the pandemic has been super hard on the mental health of students. And what I would say is what I heard was that Lowell is actually better than a lot of high schools in the Bay Area. If you look at the Bay Area, including Silicon Valley, and the North Bay, Marin and places like that, is that it was kind of always a more balanced school. I know it doesn't seem like that from what you're seeing in the kids today, but football used to be really big at Lowell High School. They used to have the best spirit and like people in the stands. That wasn't the case when we were there. The kids were not, there would be more players than kids in the stands. But by the same token, there was a suicide every other year that we were there filming, like the year before and the year after. However, again, it's a bit of an epidemic in the Bay Area. I started out researching in other school districts, and one of the principals that I spoke to in the South Bay said they definitely have to deal, it's a big problem in their community, but they're lucky because they don't have a train, and because, there's places where there are parents that have to, monitor the train tracks.
Oh, wow.
And this is, that actually was one of the original ideas in motivators in making the film. I was sort of looking at that. But Lowell in particular, I wouldn't say it's, worse than other places. I would say that on a whole, it's a mental health crisis that we're experiencing in America. That's why the Surgeon General in January declared a student mental health crisis.
I guess it comes up for this film and for this particular school because it looks like the kids are so driven and constantly doing schoolwork. But and the way you had to tell the one kid that he was having a dance on Friday. I love the look on his face.
And he was the one whose mom was like telling him to relax.
Right, exactly.
You're taking too many hard classes.
Maybe a little too much relaxation. But do they other than the one dance that the kid nearly missed, do they actually on their own take a fair bit of time to be kids? I mean, this is maybe a question about what's in and not in the film, and there's only so much you can fit, but it comes across that they're really driven. And if they have 10 free minutes, they're going to read a physics book or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think they have a lot of fun in their own sort of like nerdy way. And I've heard other parents say, "Oh, Lowell, that's the place where all the best parties are," from their teenage sons who go to other schools, But they have I think what you see is it's like our whole society, we're like pushing out to the extremes of everything, and so they're teenagers. They have a lot of fun. That fun does not include watching movies because it takes too long and they don't have enough time, that I can verify. I would always ask them that. That would be like a really special treat to go to the movie theater instead of doing their homework. But like they find their fun in a different way, and they really are kind of professional students at Lowell High School, where they're getting to school. They're there for like from 7 a.m. till after 5, and then competing in some varsity sport at the end of the day. And they're really just, like Shay said, getting 4 hours of sleep a night to cram it all in. And that's their kind of, and then within that world, they have fun in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
But it is different. I think it's a different, and it's interesting to hear your local ecosystem, and then also our different backgrounds in schools. But throughout San Francisco, I mean, there's definitely this quality of, everyone's working, they're trying so hard and not feeling like they're being rewarded for it.
That seems pretty rough. Hansel, actually, I should have asked this earlier, but Hansel, I was wondering if you have any questions. I shouldn't just be the only one asking questions here, but Hansel, do you have a question about the film too, perhaps?
Well, I thought it would be a great tool for working with pre-service teachers and even in-service teachers. We're wanting to do a lot more professional development. I know that there may be a period before we would be able to have access to the film in that manner, but it would be an excellent tool in working with pre-service teachers, especially, I think. But in-service teachers are seeing, and we're even doing professional development around notions of social emotional learning and helping teachers be prepared for really the wide range of difficulties students will present to them. But we also want teachers to be prepared for the positives too. So that I mean, there's more to school than the SAT. There's more to education than rankings and those kind of things. And we want teachers to embrace that and not become a part of this system that just reifies this caste system that we were talking about before. But anyway, it's a comment about the film, really, Debbie. Love to be able to use it.
We would love you to use it.
Yes.
We're very happy when educators find our film useful. And actually, we started this, when our film came out, we created an impact campaign to really try to promote mental health and DEI in college, high school and college admissions, for high school students who are applying to college. Yeah. Yes.
Absolutely. Just and certainly our in-service teachers need much more training on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but not training, but understanding, experiences. Just a whole range of that. One of the things that sometimes we don't realize is that I think about, I believe it's just over 80% of all of the teachers in the country are actually white women. And so many of them are coming from suburban experiences, oftentimes middle-class experiences, while at the same time, so many of our students are coming from working class neighborhoods and communities, and those experiences that come along with that, and a whole range of other types of diversities. Depending upon what state you're in, some of those diversities get suppressed. And those states shall go nameless on this stream. But it's really very important that teachers can reach all of their students, so they can help those students be resilient to all of these distractions that they have in their lives.
Well, I'm going to jump in with a quick question then too, talking about diversity and teachers being able to reach all of the students. There was, this is a question actually that came in from the audience. Do you think that the Stanford admissions officer's question, how many of you would like to go to a college where everyone is the same, is a shallow or racist question? Because I know that's, I don't know if I'm attuned to hearing it, but that's exactly, I couldn't believe the guy said it. I'm guessing that's part of the reason it's in the film, but yeah, Hansel,
yeah, but I mean, it goes to what universities are really supposed to be. And I had a professor many decades ago define universities as that name comes from the fact that universities are supposed to reflect the universe. And it's the universe of knowledge, the universe of ideas, the universe of experiences, that this is the place where we look at all of these things and have these experiences with a variety of people. So universities ought to be diverse. I mean, it's built into the actual identity of what a university ought to be. In fact, the opposite of what a university should be this narrow range of just one type of intellect, one type of identity, one type of background, one type of wealth level. That's not what universities ought to be.
I guess last question here. We're running up against the last couple of minutes, but last quick question, I guess, for the filmmaker, and just basically should ask this up at the top. Why did you make this film? Why in particular this? I know you started off theoretically doing one about tiger mothers charging their kids along, but how did it change to this and looking more at the students instead?
Well, I've always made films about my community, about the Asian American experience, and really because those stories aren't being told, and there's our stories have been pretty invisible for the several hundred years of history in America, and so I when I started making this about Lowell, I was very curious about a high school where it was a majority Asian American community and what that would be like. It was so different because I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, where at a time when there were no Asians, we were like the only ones. So I was actually really curious what that would be like, yeah, that was one of the motivating factors. But really, it's like I think what Hansel has been talking about is like the students. When you're an educator and you're an adult already, and you're educating a young person, you're already pretty much outside of their lives. And for all of these problems that are happening in the college admissions process, the students are being talked about, being pointed to and everything, but we don't really know them that well, actually. Their stories aren't centered. And it's really, that's the biggest thing I've heard from educators in watching our film, is even the ones that have worked in education for their whole lives. It's like, oh, it's really walking in their shoes as young people and seeing what they're going through. It's quite eye-opening. And so that was actually one of my reasons.
Well,
and
thank you.
Sorry that the sun has set on me.
Okay.
Okay, no, I think we're wrapping up. We have Laurel showing up here, giving me the sign. But thank you both. This was wonderful. I'm so glad you could both join us this evening to talk about the film and talk about education and bounce around these ideas.
And thanks to everybody in the audience. Just about everybody stuck around for the discussion, which doesn't always happen. So that's cool. Thank you, Debbie, for making this film and for joining us tonight. Dr. Burley, thank you a million for coming to talk about how this relates to our state, which is almost as unique as San Francisco, just in a different way. So I just want to remind everybody that you can watch on KNME channel 5.1. You can watch the entire 90-minute documentary. Remember, you only saw a short version of this on Monday, May 2nd at 9 p.m. or check your local station if you're not from New Mexico. Sometimes we get people in the audience from all over the place. So thanks to everybody, and thanks you guys for joining us. Have a great evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks again.
Bye.